So the immutable laws of swinging are those things that are constant and never changing. Let's not waste any time. So the first law of immutable swinging is swing like an athlete. And to understand that, what that law, we have to move on to the next immutable law right away, which is we don't see the real swing. And so what do I mean by that? We have to look at the typical way we view tennis and tennis swings. What you're about to see is a video filmed in real speed, 30 frames a second, that I filmed myself of Djokovic hitting backhand ground stroke. And you'll see that how quickly this transpires in real time. Depending on where we start and end the clip, how much prep time and follow through we include. It's somewhere between 1 and 2 seconds. Typically more like 2 seconds, because the player is sort of standing vertically, reading and not reacting at the beginning, and then it takes a long time to finish. So we're looking at a window of 2 seconds. So let me ask if you're ready to see this right now, because it happens very fast. And so I'm going to hit play in right now. So the second immutable law is that we don't see the real swing. Well, obviously we saw something like a real swing here in those 2 seconds. But what we watched primarily 90% of the time in those 2 seconds was Djokovic standing vertically, preparing to hit in the follow-through period and recovery. There's only a very brief window where he's actually actively swinging. Here we see the real swing, where he's dropped into the slot in transition and he's moved through the follow-through. That only takes 1/10 of a second. So that's the real swing. That is too fast to possibly see very well. It really ends up to be a blur at best. So we really can't analyze it in real time. When we look at the beginning and ending of the stroke, where he's standing vertically, and the 1/10 of a second where he's engaged in the real swing, then we start to understand why it's important that we swing like an athlete, because it's only in that 1/10 of a second that the player is really engaging in the athletic swinging process. The other times he's just standing vertically, reading and adjusting and preparing, and the last part of it is just recovery and follow through. That the swing is already over by then. So we really have to get into the mindset that when we talk about swing, we're talking about that 1/10 of a second on ground strokes. And we're not talking about the 90% where the player is standing vertically. In that 1/10 of a second, all the athleticism that you see in this picture, the de-leveling of the shoulders, the bends and the coils that we've been talking about throughout the whole forehand series and now the backhand series, come into play. But typically, recreational players, they don't see that. They look around the courts and everybody is standing vertically and they're swinging vertically, and the path of their swing is horizontal. So they never really have the chance to swing and hit a topspin shot. And their teachers, even on YouTube, when they're demonstrating something or talking about tennis, they're just standing vertically and they're moving their arms in a more or less horizontal manner typically. Now once some of them are good players, they get out on the court and they show a video of them swinging, then all of a sudden the athleticism comes into play. But that's when they're swinging, not when they're talking to you. And now we're back to the second immutable law. Again, we don't see the real swing. Or what do I mean? Besides the verticality and the athleticism change when we're doing real swinging, in terms of the topspin on the forehand and the backhand, the average person just doesn't have a accurate mental map of how vertical the swing path is on a modern topspin forehand or backhand. That it's 25 to 30% vertical at this pass-through contact. This is so much more vertical than is in people's minds and most instructors' mind, where they may talk about starting the racket low and sort of moving up in some upward path. This is not going the sharply vertical path that we see in modern topspin shots. And you can see these pictures of the big three from behind, where you can actually or this is actually to the side, where you can see this verticality of the path through contact better. And once we understand to play a modern topspin shot on the forehand or backhand, that we need to develop this ability to this sharply vertical path through contact, then it makes us understand much more clearly why we need to adopt an athletic hitting posture and swinging posture. It's only when we get into the bending of the spine and the body and the coils and uncoiling and the spiraling action that we have on both sides, backhand, forehand, that we can possibly have the arm swing come up and finish in this sharply vertical manner. It's completely impossible standing vertically like I am now. Yes, you can say, well, I can move my arm vertically. Yes, you can, but you can't swing a tennis racket fast or effectively this way. You know, you can swing this arm around 5 or 10 miles an hour. That's all you'll get if you just use your arm. And you're never going to be able to make consistent contact on any kind of fast moving ball, just using your arm and your arm-led path. You have to let the body lead and let the arms flow around the body and be governed by the timing of the body, which, you know, we've covered in great detail in the past and we'll continue to talk about, because it's one of the prerequisites of, again, just the way most people have this vertical and linear bias. They see even the pros standing vertically and somehow they're swinging and they end up vertical. And their whole impression is that there's much more verticality in this process than there really is. In the real swing, that verticality disappears into a much more bending, athletic, moving, tilted position, where the spine, as I've said in every lesson I've had when we get to the how-to section, I said you have to start with an athletic posture. And what does that mean? Is that there's always a forward tilt of the body from the hips, 20 to 40 degrees, depending on the sports. We'll look at them. And this allows us to access the middle back and rotate our bodies around this tilted forward spine angle. And there's always a lateral side bend. As I said, we drop into the slot with a side bend. Remember me saying this? Well, that side bend is important because it opens up the space behind us to drop the racket in the slot for an inside-out pathway on the backhand and the forehand side. Without that side bend, even with a forward tilt, our arms are going to swing around and we're going to have an outside-in swing path to our shots, which has all kinds of problems with it. So you see in the next slide here that in these throwing actions of the football throw and the baseball throw, there is an average typical forward tilt and lateral tilt. The lateral tilt is always to the throwing or hitting side, because that's where we need the space for the slotting and the arm path for an inside-out arm path. And you can look to the other swinging sports, baseball, golf, and tennis. You know, they're slightly different, but the essential idea is exactly the same in all throwing and swinging sports, that you need some sort of forward tilt to access the rotational power of our body, and you need a lateral tilt for spacing around your body for an inside-out path, and you also need it for loading and pulling around with the core of your body in a rotational swing with a side bend. And you can see in these next slides that are behind me how similar they are in all throwing sports. You can, so from the discus here, the next one is the javelin thrower. You can see the tilt and you can see the side bend. You can see it in the football throw. I think this is Josh Allen, who plays for one of the NFL teams, one of the top quarterbacks. Picture's kind of blurry, but you get the same idea. There's a forward tilt and a side bend to his throwing action. Baseball throws the same way. Tilt and side bend, forward tilt and side bend. And then for the swinging sports, baseball, golf, you can see Tiger Woods on this slide behind me, all have that forward tilt and side bend to the hitting side. And of course, finally, we have the tennis swing, which follows this exact pattern. Maybe a few degrees less of certainly than forward tilt than in golf, because the ball is on the ground. We have a 30 to 40% forward tilt, okay? In tennis, obviously, we're not hitting the ball on the ground, hitting it all kinds of different ranges, so our forward tilt is significantly less, but there still is forward tilt. The fourth immutable law of swinging is that athletes throw or swing at 90 degrees of the spine angle. And you'll see this as in the background here as we go through various sports, that this, obviously our arms are connected to our shoulders and our shoulders are connected to the spine. So as the spine tilts and side bends and we start to engage in a rotational action of swinging or throwing around this tilted axis, that as the arms extend out in the swinging process, they tend to swing in the same plane as our shoulders. So if we change the level of our shoulders and swing, our arm path is going to be changed. And so backhand, forehand, side on tennis as well. And it's not something we really have to think about, but it's an important concept because we really have to change and get into a much more athletic mode of movement and being when we're playing tennis. Get out of this vertical linear perspective and get into this athletic, tilted, oriented, bending and curving way, and let our focus be on our body form and actions. And this law, this immutable law, is that the arm path will be perfect if we get our body perfect, if we get our shoulder plane perfect. And that's much easier to do than controlling our arms out here. So, all we have to do is turn our body in a certain plane and our arms will follow. This is, essential to know and understand as you develop your swing. So you can see in all these different sports, discus, javelin, baseball, golf, tennis, that the arms swing on the same plane as the shoulders rotate. And so our focus should be on achieving the right shoulder tilts and de-leveling as we are engaging in the swinging process. Where the body goes, the arms will follow. And someone might ask, well, why is it always 90 degrees? Well, the simple answer is just the way the human body is built and it's constructed over millions of years of evolution. So very simply, if we're standing vertical and we have a rotational path, then my arms are swinging at 90 degrees of my spine angle, which is straight, and they're swinging horizontally. Okay, but in no good throwing and swinging sport do we swing this way. Is we have a side bend and tilt, and in tennis, we're swinging, and all other sports are swinging on a tilted plane. And our arms are going, following the line and shoulder rotation on both sides. And this is true of all sports. So again, we have to get our priorities straight. It's the body that we need to be thinking about first in swinging. And we have to get the body form and the body movements down correctly in order to get the arm swing correctly. The sixth immutable law of swinging, something very blunt that we've talked about in the past, is keep your butt back in the swinging process. In the background here, you see Tiger Woods, the greatest golfer of the latest generation, was the #1 player in the world for 13 years. All the athletic talent in the world, right? But he is deliberately practicing what we're talking about with the forward tilt of the body and the side bending. And as we do that, of course, especially in golf where you have a much steeper forward angle, your butt has to be back to do this. And he's exaggerating, which of course we should do in practice to break old habits. Really get that butt back and keep the butt back in as we process through our swing mode. And only as we come up and through the shot does the torso raise up and straighten up again into this vertical posture. But by then the vertical path that we need is already passed. And I've talked about this before with the conclusion of our movement map overview lesson today. There's no how-to deliberate segment to this lesson. It would take far too long to cover the how-to of all these things. But there are some things you could just take away today to improve your tennis. And just keeping these two laws in mind, you know, swing like an athlete and keep your butt back. You can take those two ideas out to the court today. And how would you do it? Well, I would advise you to get your physical warm-up before you walked out on the court to play your match. And so you're not spending your time warming up, you're already warmed up. And then you spend those 5 or 10 minutes in the hitting warm-up focusing on these two ideas. Swing like an athlete and keep your butt back. And you can start to get into a different kind of mentality. You're probably going to lose that mentality once the match starts. You lose it at different times, but you started the process. And then after that match, you can reflect back on it and think about these things, and then keep practicing swinging like an athlete and keeping your butt back. And over time, this will become second nature to you, and your game will start to rise. I guarantee it, and so do all the skills acquisition experts and the top coaches in other sports guarantee it. As you keep out swinging at developing your game on these immutable law principles, and your game is going to keep getting better, and if you keep at it for a long time, well, you're going to achieve some athletic glory, I guarantee it.